Well, one would have to be toweringly ignorant not to recognize that COVID USA has unleashed a torrent of attacks on our rights, living standards, and the Constitution. But in the midst of the maelstrom, the fearmongers in various states have allowed their tragic errors to open up the dark clouds and shine a ray of light. What is it? Well, it turns out that changes in license mandates in various states now see those states allowing occupational licenses from other states. Get ready, because I'll show how this is both economically great and constitutionally important. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRCTV. Well, it's clear that many of the economic hardships Americans suffer in COVID USA find their roots not in any real measurable danger of the Wuhan coronavirus, but from the political shutdowns restricting supplies of products and services, and from the hype. But these factors have led some politicians to have to either overtly or covertly recognize the problems stemming from something all states have imposed on their residents contrary to the Constitution and the laws of economics. It's a big salvo of intellectual ammunition that was foreshadowed in Arizona, where last year its government became the first state in the union to initiate universal recognition of professional licenses. In other words, the state will recognize out-of-state work licenses. Of course, the very term work license should set off some alarm bells for every person aware of individual rights and the history of totalitarian states. But sadly, many Americans grew up with the term and rarely question its anti-liberty, anti-economic implications. Catalyst policy fellow Connor Norris explains. Last year, Arizona became the first state to recognize other states' occupational licenses for people moving in. Universal recognition legislation allows any professional who has met the requirements and maintained licensure for a year in any other U.S. state to transfer that license to Arizona and begin working. And Norris correctly points out how this increase in liberty has led to increases in economic opportunity. Trade, competition, and the help of the poor have all occurred. In less than a year, over 750 people have been able to move to Arizona and begin working immediately. This helps not only those moving to Arizona, but the Arizonans who are now able to receive services from these professionals. Indeed, Montana, Utah, and Pennsylvania quickly followed suit to pass similar legislation, and now, with the collapse of the supply chain and a hyper-worry related political desire to get more medical workers into their states, Norris explains that 14 states have been forced to see how licensing restricts supply. Due to shortages of healthcare workers, localities with early outbreaks feared being overwhelmed. Healthcare professionals in states with far fewer cases were ready and willing to move, but they were blocked by state licensing requirements. 14 states quickly responded by temporarily granting healthcare workers temporary reciprocity to encourage them to move to the state and begin practicing without delay. Of course, it turned out that the fear-inspired central planning thoughts about needing more health workers were unfounded. But the takeaway, lighter licensing mandates, is one of the few positives one can take from the convoluted moves made by many state politicians in COVID USA. As I've noted at MRCTV, licensing is a form of economic fascism, the nominal, in name only, ownership of private business under the overall command and control of the state. Economists also observe the universal fact that licensing is not just a way to control businesses and for the state to shake down citizens who simply want to engage in voluntary commerce. It's a way to allow big, favored businesses to block competition, what is called rent-seeking in economics. It allows them to profit at the expense of consumers by gaming the system and restricting competition. Licenses restrict the entrance of new professionals artificially raise wages and prices consumers pay. They slow down innovation and entrepreneurship and erect barriers to low-skilled workers trying to enter the labor market. All that with no measurable effect on quality, according to a 2015 White House report. Similar findings have come from researchers at ideologically diverse places like the National Bureau of Economic Research, the University of Minnesota, the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty, and the Council of Economic Advisors. Licensing is very, very bad. Which is interesting because so many politicians who favor licensing, i.e. mandating that you pay them to get their permission to do what you have a right to do in the first place, are the same politicians who launch fountains of crocodile tears about helping the poor, with things like, of course, minimum wage orders and tax redistribution. Now, perhaps people will remember these desperate moves by politicians to lift their licensing requirements so that they can bring in more workers in COVID USA. And perhaps they'll apply this to two other important areas. First, not only is it economically backwards and authoritarian to impose license mandates, most state constitutions don't explicitly grant such power at all, and the contract clause of the U.S. Constitution forbids state governments from interfering with the fulfillment of already existing private contracts. And even if one accepts the mistaken idea that it's good or constitutional for states to grant licenses, in other words, to demand a license, the full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution, which can be found in Article 4, Section 1, mandates that any legal document from one state will be recognized by all states with the full faith and credit of that document. That means that if a plumber is forced to be licensed in Massachusetts, the license must be accepted in New York and in every other state. Simply put, the U.S. Constitution would make these state moves redundant if, yes, it's a big if people who swear oaths to the Constitution actually abided by it. In some ways, we can see echoes of this principle when people drive over state borders or rent cars out of state. Their driver's licenses are recognized in every state per the design of the full faith and credit clause for legal documents. And one of the most important facets of that principle is that the already unconstitutional, anti-Second Amendment, anti-rights gun licensing laws should also be viewed with the same eye. If one state grants a license to own a gun or openly carry a gun or carry a concealed firearm, all states must recognize that license. Now, states shouldn't be mandating such licenses in the first place, and all politicians who push those licenses are breaking their oaths, but at the same time, people can bring this new point up to their state politicians and ask them why an out-of-state firearms license isn't being recognized in their state. Undoubtedly, the politicians will be unwilling to answer or actually incapable of answering, but COVID USA exposes what is happening and lets us remember these extremely important facts. We can remember them and we can pass them on to people. Thank you for being part of this group, one and all. I really enjoy communicating with you over on YouTube. Definitely look us up there. Don't forget to find us on Facebook. Head over to MRCTV.org, the website, to find out everything that the team is doing. And if you want some great MRC fashions, go over to MRC-store. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.